Porsche has just patented a revolutionary six-stroke. Before we get started, Porsche. Some people say you should be pronouncing it the original German way. Porsche. Hast du mein Porsche gesehen? And they're very strict about this. Now, I personally believe it's more important that we understand each other rather than how somebody pronounces something. And although I'm not American, it's easier for me to say Porsche, and it's my video, so I'm going to be saying it Porsche for the rest of the video. There you go. I just saved you from commenting your pronunciation preferences that nobody cares about. So Porsche has just recently patented a revolutionary six-stroke engine. And according to them, it has the power benefits of a two-stroke while having the durability and emissions cleanliness of a four-stroke. Sounds almost too good to be true. Now, as you probably know, a traditional four-stroke which powers virtually every car, truck, and motorcycle on the road today does intake, compression, combustion, and then exhaust. A six-stroke adds one more compression and one more combustion event into the mix. So it goes intake, compression, combustion, compression, combustion, exhaust. It almost does a little DJ loop on the compression, combustion. So intake, compression, combustion, for compression, combustion, exhaust. That was so unnecessary. Now, what we're going to do in this video is that first we're going to see how is that even possible by explaining in detail how this engine actually works. And then we are going to discuss its benefits, its drawbacks, and its potential to become mainstream, or mass-produced at least, in the near future, because why would Porsche be patenting this now when there's going to be allegedly a ban of sales of new combustion vehicles starting with 2035? Okay, so if we go into the Porsche patent drawings, we are going to find this image. And here we can see this large ring gear. Inside the ring gear, we have another gear, a planet gear. What's important about this planet gear is that it has an element on it that is offset from the center, so it's eccentric. So here we have our ring gear, our planet gear, and our eccentric element on the planet gear. If we observe the rotation of the planet gear, we can see that the center of the planet gear, of course, follows a perfect circle. But the center of the offset, the eccentric element, does not follow a perfect circle. Instead, it follows along a path that looks something like this, and this is known as a hypocycloidal path. We can see this same hypocycloidal path in the patent drawings too. Now observe what happens when we connect a connecting rod to the eccentric element. When the eccentric element is in this position, it allows the piston to reach the highest point in the cylinder. We will call this our first top dead center. As the eccentric element continues to rotate, it will reach this point. As you can see, the piston is now a bit below top dead center. We will call this point our second top dead center. The same thing happens on the bottom dead center. When the eccentric element is here, it allows the piston to reach this point in the cylinder. We will call this our first bottom dead center. As the eccentric element continues to rotate, it ends up in this position where it allows the piston to end up even lower in the cylinder. And we will call this point our second bottom dead center. So as you can see, the eccentric element on the planet gear and the fact that the connecting rod is attached to it gives the engine two top and two bottom dead centers. As you will see, this is absolutely critical, and it is what allows the engine to perform the 6 strokes. It's also important to note that the crankshaft rod journal is attached centrally to the planet gear, so that the crankshaft can follow a perfectly circular path. It's only the big end of the rod that goes onto the eccentric element and is forced into a hypocycloidal path. Something else that the patent mentions is a worm gear that meshes with the teeth on the outer side of the ring gear. This allows us to manipulate the outer ring gear while the engine is running, which makes it possible to have complete control over a variable compression ratio and also to deviate from the path we showed, which opens up various possibilities. The final piece of the puzzle are these ports, which we can find between the first and second bottom dead center. The distance between the first and second bottom dead center is equal to the height of the ports, and this is of course equal to the offset in the eccentric gear. These ports at the bottom of the cylinder allow fresh air and fuel to enter into the engine when the piston uncovers them. And the piston starts to uncover these ports only when it goes below the first bottom dead center. And finally, we also have conventional intake and exhaust valves at the top of the engine. Now let's observe the full working cycle of the 6-stroke engine. Our first stroke is intake, and it begins at the second top dead center. During this stroke, the intake valve opens and air and fuel comes in as the piston goes down. The intake stroke ends at the first bottom dead center due to the position of the eccentric element, which keeps the piston from reaching further down in the bore. This also means that the bottom ports or the scavenging ports remain closed by the piston. Now the compression stroke starts. The piston goes up and compresses the air-fuel mixture. As the eccentric element rotates around, it now allows the piston to reach the first top dead center and fully compress the air-fuel mixture. Just before the piston reaches the first top dead center, the fuel mixture gets ignited and the compression stroke ends. The combustion stroke now begins. Combustion pressure acts on the piston, creating torque as the piston travels down. As the piston is going down, the eccentricity now allows the piston to reach the second bottom dead center. As it does so, it uncovers the ports. At the same time, an exhaust valve opens on the top, and the pressurized exhaust gases from the completed combustion now escape through the exhaust valve and leave a vacuum behind them because they rapidly vacate the cylinder. This vacuum pulls in a fresh air-fuel mixture through the bottom ports. Now, this only works if the exhaust gases are pressurized enough, which doesn't really usually happen at idle. So at idle, we might need the help of forced induction to push the fresh air-fuel mixture into the combustion chamber and force the exhaust gases out. As you can see, the bottom ports are fairly short in relation to total engine stroke, so they're open only for a brief period of time, which means that they're likely unable to replace all the exhaust gas with a fresh air-fuel mixture. Instead, what we likely have at the beginning of our second stroke is a mixture of fresh air and fuel and some exhaust gas. So something similar to what we have when the EGR, or exhaust gas recirculation valve, allows some exhaust gas back into an engine. So now begins our second compression, which starts at the second bottom dead center and ends at the first top dead center. The air, fuel, and exhaust mixture is ignited, creating the second combustion stroke, which likely creates less torque due to the presence of the inert exhaust gas. But torque is still created as the piston moves down. Our second combustion stroke ends at the first bottom dead center, again due to the effects of the crankshaft gear eccentricity. And finally, the piston moves back up to push the exhaust gas out through the exhaust valve. Our exhaust stroke ends at the second top dead center, which ends the cycle and begins a new cycle and a new intake stroke, which again, of course, starts from the second top dead center. That's how it works. Now let's talk about first the benefits. Benefit number one. This relies on 100% conventional mechanics and technology. The gears, the crankshaft, the connecting rod, the piston, even the little ports at the bottom, it's all very conventional. By the way, this arrangement where we have ports which are known as scavenging ports on one side of the cylinder and conventional valves on the other is usually known as uniflow scavenging because the gas moves through the cylinder in a uniform fashion, and this is very common on two-stroke diesels in ships and locomotives and other industrial applications. The 6 strokes also, they don't really make a problem for the camshafts. We do need to change some things. Instead of rotating at half the crankshaft speed, the camshafts now need to rotate at 1/3 the crankshaft speed, so we need just a slightly larger cam gear, and we need an additional exhaust lobe on the exhaust cam. So that's pretty much it. So What this means is that because we have very conventional technology, we do not need massive investments into research and development to get this engine to market. Benefit number 2 is that this does make more power than a traditional 4-stroke. If we observe the first 720 degrees of rotation, then it doesn't really make any more power because we just have one power stroke, one combustion event during the first 720 degrees of rotation, just like in a traditional 4-stroke. But we have another combustion event starting right at 720 degrees. A traditional 4-stroke cannot do this. It can only do the second combustion event at 1080 degrees. So we need more rotation from a traditional 4-stroke. Now, if we observe, let's say, 7,200 degrees of rotation, then a traditional 4-stroke is, of course, going to do 10 combustion events. A 6-stroke is going to do 13.34 combustion events. So that's 33.4% potentially more power. Now, it is definitely not in 2-stroke territory because during 7,200 degrees, a 2-stroke is going to do 20 combustion events. And that's going to be 20 proper full combustion events. Remember, in the 6-stroke, every other stroke is a bit weaker because it's going to have a lot of exhaust gas, inert, potentially exhaust gas in it, which means that we're probably not looking at 33.4% power increase, but let's say something like 25% power increase. But 25% more power with conventional technology and 4-stroke, traditional 4-stroke reliability and emissions friendliness is a big deal. Something else that a 6-stroke allows is to run a very, very high boost and still be pretty emissions friendly. When you run crazy high boost, let's say something like 3 bar or 45 psi, you need to run a very rich mixture and excess of fuel to prevent knock. When you burn such a rich air fuel mixture, you're going to have leftover fuel in the exhaust gas. If you send that fuel out into the atmosphere, you're going to have horrible emissions. But remember, in the 6-stroke, we don't send all of that exhaust gas into the atmosphere. We just send a little bit of it when the bottom ports open, just a little bit escapes. The rest remains in the cylinder and gets compressed and burned again, which means that you have another chance of burning your unburned fuel, which means much better emissions. So massive boost and government approval. The next benefit is efficiency, but I think that at cruising conditions, this design does not really significantly improve efficiency because if we're cruising low RPM, low load, whatever, we're running usually something close to a stoichiometric air-fuel mixture, which means that we have a clean burning combustion and really no unburned fuel in the exhaust, which means that there's not that much energy or any significant quantity of energy to be harnessed from the exhaust gas, and the second combustion or every other combustion stroke in a 6-stroke depends sort of on what's in the exhaust gas. So if there's nothing significant to be harnessed from the exhaust gas, then there's really no significant gains in efficiency. In other words, where this engine can improve efficiency is at high load, high RPM, high boost, where we potentially have unburned fuel in the exhaust, and here we can sort of harness some of that energy, recover it during that second combustion stroke. The final benefit is compactness and simplicity, and for what it is, this design is pretty simple and compact. We're gaining the ability to do 6 strokes while just marginally increasing engine size and mass and complexity. The ring gear really is the main culprit behind a potential increase in engine size, but that too is kind of design friendly. You can somehow stick it into the engine block without increasing the engine block too much. It's a round shape, usually easy to design things around it, and it's very thin, so it doesn't increase engine length. In terms of mass and complexity, we're really just adding 3 parts, more parts: ring gear, planet gear, worm gear, and that's per crankshaft, because you can add 1 planet gear to a single multi-cylinder crankshaft and do the same thing as this single cylinder example in the video. So we're gaining 25% more power and improving efficiency at high RPM, high load, but we're definitely not increasing engine size and mass by 25%. And now the drawbacks. The first drawback is, of course, the gears. Very obvious. Introducing gears to anything is creating a parasitic loss, which reduces efficiency, which is one of the other reasons why I don't think that this design is primarily focused on efficiency. The second drawback is that For this engine to function as it functions in the patent drawings, we need a very long piston with a very long skirt. And that's because when the piston is at top dead center, the first top dead center, it needs to be long enough to still close off the ports, the scavenging ports at the bottom, which means that the piston ends up being pretty much half the entire stroke of the engine, and that's a very long piston. A very long piston has a lot of mass, and a piston with a lot of mass is going to create a lot of vibrations, which is going to limit maximum RPM. I think that realistically, in the final design, if this ever sees the light of day, we're not going to see a locomotive-style piston like this, especially not on something that could be a Porsche engine. What I think a more likely solution would be, in reality, is to control the access of air to the scavenging ports, because there's another port or intake duct or whatever leading air to the scavenging ports. If we can control that with some sort of valve, then we might not need such a giant piston. The final drawback, and this one is probably the most significant one, is engine balance. It's not horrible, but it's not ideal either. Now, if we take this graph of the running cycle of the engine, we can use this also as a primary force graph of a single piston, because it's pretty much the same thing. Now, if we take one more piston and offset it by 180 degrees to balance the pistons out, which works well in traditional four-stroke designs, we can see that in the six-stroke it doesn't work because we have uneven stroke lengths, so the two pistons do not fully balance each other out, and we have a resulting force creating some vibrations. Similar things happen with secondary force, where again pistons cannot fully balance each other out. The resulting vibrations are pretty small, but they're still there and should be mentioned. The next issue with balance we have is the planet gear. It rotates around pretty quickly as the engine is running, so it's creating its own forces, which are also have the possibility to produce vibrations on the engine. And then we also have the offset to the eccentric element on the planet gear, which also creates its own forces as it's spinning around, and another little potential source of vibrations. And the final issue with balance that we have is that the eccentric element misaligns the big end of the connecting rod against the crankshaft counterweight. So we can't really use the crankshaft counterweight to fully balance out the big end of the rod. This misalignment is small, and the big end of the rod is still in the general counter position of the crankshaft counterweight, but part of it is from time to time outside of the area where the crankshaft counterweight could balance it out. They're pointing in different directions. So this too creates a little source of potential vibrations. So as you can see, we have multiple sources of very small vibrations. Although none of them are individually significant vibrations, I guess that they do add up. However, it is likely possible to mitigate these vibrations with a different cylinder count and engine configuration. And Porsche does mention this in the patent, saying that this design, the six-stroke, is most suitable for engine cylinder numbers, which are multiples of 3. So 3, 6, 9, and 12. Of course, the 6 is what matters here, because as we know, 911s are all about flat 6s. So it is possible that this cylinder configuration, together with perhaps some mechanical devices, can render these vibrations to a non-significant level. So overall, I have to say that I like this design. It is elegant, it is clever, and very much Porsche-like, if that makes sense. And it's good because it brings significant benefits to the table without having any major unresolvable drawbacks. And as a final note, let's talk about why patent this now if there's going to be a ban on ICE vehicles starting with 2035 in the EU and I think some other parts of the world. Well, here's the deal. There's not going to be an actual full, complete ban of ICE vehicles in the EU starting with 2035. The people who still think that and spread this information are allowing mass media headlines to shape their opinions, and I'm pretty sure that most of these people haven't really made it to this point in the video. They're probably in the comments down below regurgitating some sort of context-less snippet of information they picked up during their many aimless journeys through the World Wide Web, so what I'm about to say probably won't reach them, but that's okay. On March 25th of 2023, the EU actually reached an agreement with Germany, whose industry very much depends on the production of vehicles. And they reached an agreement which says that new ICE vehicles can be sold and registered after 2035, provided that they are fueled by e-fuels, or environmentally friendly carbon neutral fuels. Right now, the production of such fuels is, I don't think it's sufficient to sustain anything. It's very expensive, but some people claim that it's going to ramp up a lot before 2035, and so this gives ICE vehicles, a potential to keep existing for a long time into the future new ICE vehicles. So what Porsche is actually doing here is that it is taking preventive measures which are going to allow it to produce a very high power, emissions-friendly engine that still fits into the back of a 911 in case that e-fuel production ramps up. By patenting this, they're preventing anyone else from implementing this design without paying fees to Porsche. So that's pretty much it. Again, a very rational and clever decision. So will this happen? Are we going to see it in the future? Well, it's anybody's guess. If e-fuel production does indeed ramp up, I think that it is very likely that Porsche is going to greenlight some sort of project, an actual research and development project on this. Will e-fuel production ramp up? Who knows? Is it going to be expensive? I'm pretty sure it is going to be expensive, the e-fuels, but I don't think that's a major issue for Porsche buyers. So there you have it, the 6-stroke engine. As always, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll be seeing you soon with more fun and useful stuff on the D4H.